Welcome, everyone. We are going to start in just a few moments for our event, Crunching the Numbers, Unpacking the Federal Budget 2021. My name is Anjum Sultana, and I'm the National Director of Public Policy and Strategic Communications at YWCA Canada. And we're hosting this event with our good friends, YMCA Canada. My pronouns are she, her, and today we're going to be talking about the historic budget that just happened on Monday, but honestly, so much time has passed by already. And in this budget, we saw incredible wins like childcare, like investments in the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, support for charities and nonprofits, and so much more. And today, we also are going to talk about where it potentially fell short. We're going to get started right away into this conversation. So the first thing I'd like to do before we go any further is a land acknowledgement. So currently YWCA Canada, the national office, is situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities call Toronto, also known as Toronto, home. We also do a land acknowledgement to not only honor the First People, but also acknowledge the history of settler colonialism that has been perpetuated on this land for time immemorial. Today, we're meeting online, and one of the things we want to really reiterate is how do we continue to make spaces online safe? Often communities of color, Black, Indigenous peoples, gender minorities, and many other diverse equity-seeking communities face harms online. So let's all do our part to ensure that online spaces, virtual spaces, are safe for everyone. Today, I also want to just tell you a bit about the run of show, the agenda before you. We will be, right now we're doing some opening remarks. We'll actually be doing 2 rounds of panel discussion questions with our incredible panelists. We'll also be doing an audience Q&A, and we'll close off with some concluding remarks. Throughout the event, we encourage you to stay engaged by asking questions in the Q&A. And if you have any questions at all, we also encourage you to reach out to our tech colleagues. So you'll see them, they've noted their names as tech in their display name. So if you have any questions at all throughout the event, please do message them. And our colleagues, Kristen and Arissa, will be able to support you. I should note, we are currently recording the session, and ideally later this week on both YWCA Canada and YMCA Canada's YouTube pages, we'll be uploading it. We'll also send the link around later this week. We also, for this event, have enabled closed captioning. So if you'd like to use the closed captioning function, on the bottom, there is an option to enable live captioning. Currently, this allows for English captioning. We also are able to do interpretation for this event. So we have currently English to French interpretation. So to enable this feature again, please put the option English if that's the language that you want, or French, and you should be able to have access to the event in either English or French. I should note that l'interprétation en français est également offrée lors de cette présentation. Cliquez sur l'icône d'interprétation pour y accéder. We also have the Q&A enabled, as I mentioned. Because we are in webinar only mode, you don't have the option of unmuting your mic and asking your question. So please do use the Q&A function to let us know the things that you want to talk about in this event. We're also very glad to see many of you who have been sharing the event online throughout the panel discussion today. Please do tweet about the event using the hashtag crunching the numbers and tagging YWCA Canada and YMCA Canada, the co-hosts of this event. The handles are there on the screen, so please do tweet and share. We also have put the handles in the chat, so you should be able to see that shortly. So without further ado, I want to take this moment to introduce on stage my colleague, Jessica Stepich. And Jessica and I have been working very closely throughout this entire pandemic on a range of different advocacy campaigns. Jessica leads the National Advocacy and Government Relations work at YMCA Canada in their goal to build healthy communities. She is the manager of government relations at YMCA Canada. At YMCA Canada, she brings forward YMCA's expertise and experience to advance federal policy in key areas, including early learning and childcare, youth employment, and leadership and supports for the charitable sector. Previously, Jessica worked at a public affairs agency working on a range of different activities and tactics, and in particular has expertise in the healthcare sector. Jessica holds an honors Bachelor's of Science degree in biology and economics from Queen's University, and also holds a certificate in public relations from George Brown College. Jessica, welcome to the event.
Thank you, Anjum. I'm super excited to be here. Hi, everyone. As Anjum introduced me, I am Jessica Stepich, Manager of Government Relations at YMCA Canada. My pronouns are she, her. And I would also like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from Toronto and thank Anjum for leading the land acknowledgement this morning. YMCA Canada is very excited to be collaborating with YWCA Canada on this event and to be able to bring together a brilliant panel of social impact leaders. I am particularly excited to be building a tradition with you, Anjum, where we seem to be unpacking the budget together. The first was 2 years ago during the 2019 budget lockup in Ottawa. And it seems that this year we traded the lockup for a lockdown. But as one of my friends pointed out, both didn't have self-service thanks to the Rogers outage that we were both experiencing on Monday. So at least that stayed the same. And just to reiterate what you had introduced, Monday's budget was historic for many reasons. It was the first budget, federal budget in 2 years, the first delivered by Canada's first female Minister of Finance with over $100 billion in spending over the next 3 years. And of course, it was historic for its incredible length, over 700 pages and the longest in Canada's history. So I will say that this event is well placed in the week because it gave me in particular more time to get through all 700 pages. And I am very excited to dive in.
I hear you, Jessica, and it's so funny, especially the outage on Monday. I'm sure that gave a lot of GR folks across the country a lot of trepidation, but we got through it. You know, you told me about your MacGyver story of how you got your phone working, and yeah, I think it's definitely a day to remember, absolutely. And, you know, speaking of the budget, it felt like two budgets to me. It felt like a budget about addressing the current crisis that we're in. Currently in Ontario, we're in the middle of a very brutal third wave and stricter lockdown measures. So there was a lot in the budget about that and how we could support communities across the country. And there was also a lot about what does the future look like? What is the legacy we'll leave behind? And that's hopefully what we'll get into with this conversation. So clearly a lot to dig in. So what I'd like to do is bring on stage the rest of our incredible panelists and introduce you a bit to the people we'll be chatting with over the next hour. So first, I'd like to introduce Emmett Lamache, who is AFAB, a non-binary Franco-Albertan queer from Treaty 6 territory, who has been actively working on creating inclusive spaces for sexual and gender diversity within the context of Francophone minorities since 2016. They were a founding member of the Comité Franco-Queer de l'Ouest, for which they were the communications director for over a year. And what I love this, Emmett enjoys RuPaul's Drag Race in their spare time, which they avidly watch with their partner Ray. and their two cats, Diego and Thibaut. I'm glad to have you here, Emmett.
Thank you very much, Anjum, for your introduction. And yes, as mentioned, my name is Emmett Lamache. I use all pronouns. I live in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, and I'm the executive director of the Enchanté network, which is a organization whose membership consists of frontline serving community to us and LGBTQ plus organizations. And so we come in as a agent of networking, advocacy, and also to support the capacity development of those life-saving frontline Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus organizations.
Glad to have you here, Emmett. Excellent. So next, I'd like to introduce Sharif Mahdy, who is the Executive Director of the Students' Commission of Canada, lead of the Centre of Excellence for Youth Engagement. Sharif works with a talented team of staff, volunteers, and network partners from coast to coast to coast to build the Canada we want so that young people can have the Canada they need. Sharif holds a honors Bachelor's of Health Science and Health Promotion from the University of Western Ontario and a Master's of Arts in Leadership from Royal Roads University. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you so much, Anjum, for welcoming me to the panel today. I'm so glad to be here with you all. As I was introduced, my name is Sharif, and I use he, him, and il pronouns. I have the privilege of being the Executive Director of the Students' Commission of Canada, which is a national organization that purposely works with others to ensure young people's voices are heard and valued. And I'm just really grateful to be here with you all today from Treaty 13 territory, also known as Toronto. I also want to acknowledge that we are in across the country, a brutal time, and that it's very challenging. So just showing up today is a victory in itself for lots of us, and I'm really grateful to be here with you today.
Such an important point, Sharif. Thank you so much. And last but not least, we have Sarosi, who I have the great pleasure of working with over the last number of years in the feminist movement in Canada. Deanna is the Director of Policy and Campaigns, leading a team of amazing campaigners and policy experts working to advance gender justice, tackle growing inequality, support social movements, and promote active citizenship at Oxfam Canada. She's also a long-standing advocate with over 15 years of experience working with NGOs in Canada and throughout Southeast Asia. She's often called upon for her sharp analysis and ongoing commentary on all things gender in Canada, including the federal budget, gender budgeting, economic inequality, and so much more. Deanna holds degrees in political science and conflict resolution. And Deanna, glad to have you here.
Hi, Anjum, and hi, everyone else. It's so nice to be here. As Anjum mentioned, I'm Deanna, the Director of Policy and Campaigns, and I respectfully want to acknowledge that I'm calling in today from the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I use pronouns she and her. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. I'll be sort of focusing on one big aspect of this historic budget, childcare. So just putting out a warning already, it's most likely that my child is going to walk on me in this webinar as well, as he always does when it really counts. So there might be that coming up as well.
Well, no worries here. This is a stress-free zone for all things. And actually, we'd love that. So no worries at all. And actually, Deanna, as you were just talking about childcare, my first question is to you on, one of the big stories in this pandemic has been the disproportionate impact of this crisis on women in particular, the economic losses, the rise in unpaid care work, and so many other issues. So I'm wondering, Oxfam Canada has been talking a lot about a care economy. And did this budget deliver on this and the government's broader commitments to a feminist recovery?
Yeah, thanks, Anjum. That's a great question. And I think I can start with saying that this is one of the elements that really made this budget historic in many ways. And you probably have seen sort of the childcare community really celebrating over the last few days around what's in the budget. Many of these women that Anjum and I have been working with have been advocating for 30 years for childcare here in Canada. And so I think they really felt this week that some of that hard work they've been putting into this for decades has finally paid off. And so what's in the budget? So we saw $30 billion over 5 years. That's the biggest investment in childcare ever here in Canada. And so this will really make a difference for families all across the country and enable provinces to put in place sort of programs around the $10 a day childcare that we've seen piloted, for example, in BC most recently. And so, yeah, considering how many women have really dropped out of the workforce because of not having childcare available and not being able to sort of get back in the workforce right now because of that as well. I think this is a really, really good and smart investment by the government in ensuring that we don't sort of undo 30 years of progress towards gender equality. What I was also really pleased to see is sort of this focus on improving affordability. So this money will right away go towards reducing fees, which is so important considering Canada has one of the highest childcare fees of all the OECD countries. But there was also this focus on investing in the not-for-profit sector. And again, this is one of those issues we've been talking about for quite a while. Things like care, you can't leave it to market forces. What that means is it drives down the wages for the mostly women who work in this sector and really erodes quality of programs. So we were really pleased to see this sort of investment in building a public system over the next few years. And then another thing that was also really great to see was this commitment to enshrine the government's commitment to a Canada-wide system of early learning and childcare in legislation, which they are hoping to table this fall. So all really great. And we all know the government is trying hard in bringing more of an intersectional lens to some of their policies. So there were also commitments in there, for example, of $30 million over 2 years to increase accessibility for children with disabilities. And of course, very importantly, dedicated funding towards the Indigenous early learning and childcare initiatives that have already been spearheaded. But I think what's important to recognize is in many ways, our childcare system still really reflects this sort of, white middle class standard of needing childcare from 9 to 5. And we really need to recognize that that's just not how our labor market looks like, and especially not for people at the margins who are often working 2 to 3 jobs, right, or are stuck in contract work. So these are particular women who are from racialized communities, gender diverse communities, Indigenous communities, immigrant communities, right? So it's really important as Canada starts building the system to really bring a strong intersectional lens to it and recognize that there are definitely different needs in place rather than sort of the 9 to 5. I think another challenge the government is going to be facing is how to bring the provinces and territories on board, right? Yes, this is federal money, but ultimately it's the provinces who will need to put the system into place. And we know sort of the provinces are definitely on different spectrums when it comes to childcare, with some of them being very resistant to it and others really moving ahead, putting sort of the systems approach into place. So it's important that the government is really smart around how this money is dispersed to the provinces, really ensuring there are strong accountability mechanisms in place, so that when the money goes towards the provinces, it is actually spent on improving the affordability, accessibility, and quality of childcare, and that there are clear consequences if the provinces don't do that, right? Yeah, I'll leave it at that. As I said, it was a historic week for the childcare movement. And, you know, with the election sort of looming, I think there's still a bit of fear of, you know, whether this will all stay and come to fruition. But I think, you know, this has been such a long fight, and you have to celebrate these victories along the way. So it's been a really good week for the movement.
Absolutely. And I think I always think about what Jessica always tells me. This is a marathon, not a sprint. We got to keep on going. And the thing is, we need to be relentless. That's what got us to this point, and that's what's going to get us over the finish line. So thank you, Deanna. And I'm sure there's going to be more in the audience Q&A to unpack all the different aspects of the childcare announcement. Next, I want to pass it over to Emmett. I want to ask you around, you know, just continuing the thread around the gendered impacts of this crisis. One of the other big stories was the rise in gender-based violence. And I know that the UN has been calling this a shadow pandemic. In your role, for example, on the Ministers Advisory Council on Gender-Based Violence, and in your work leading the Enchanté network, I want to know from your perspective, what did this budget do around addressing gender-based violence, and was it enough? We saw some commitments related to the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, along investments in LGBTQ communities. Did the budget deliver? And what do you think? What's your assessment on the budget's commitments so far?
Thanks for this question, Anjum. And just before I jump into that, I did want to thank the YWCA for the budget analysis that you have put out. It really clearly demonstrated your allyship and continued support to our community, which is a support that is not always given to members of our community by women's organizations. So I just wanted to extend a heartfelt thank you to the YWCA for that. To dive into your question, the short answer is no, this budget did not deliver. Quite the opposite for members of our community, clearly. Quite the opposite. It really underwhelmed us and shocked us. After decades of chronic underfunding of our Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+ communities and the organizations providing them with life-saving and fundamental services, we're incredibly disappointed and disheartened to witness the continued under-resourcing of Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+ community organizations. So in this budget, we have been given only $15 million in commitment to be spread over 3 years. When I first read it, I thought it was a typo and that it would be 15 million per year, but no, it is not a typo. It is 15 million spread over 3 years. My math is not great, but I know that that means $5 million a year to as an LGBTQ+ organization. And not only this, but to add salt to the wound, they specified that it would be project funding and not core or capacity funding. The reason why that is really adding salt to the wound is because, historically speaking, our communities have only been able to survive by being very creative at applying for project-based funding. We have never had core funding or capacity funding until the very groundbreaking capacity grant provided through Women and Gender Equality Wage. And this is just contributing to the increased precarity of employment for members of our community. So even beyond the impact it's going to have on community members who need the services provided by frontline Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+ organizations, the folks who work for these organizations, who tend to be Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+ identified themselves, find themselves in increasingly precarious employment situations, because we don't know if these organizations are going to have continued funding over the years to pay for their position. And this is a population that already suffers from strong precarity in employment due to transphobia and homophobia. And now organizations that specifically serve people who share their identities can't even offer them stable employment. So it's like this vicious cycle, this double whammy that is just incredibly heartbreaking to us. If we continue this breakdown of the 50 million, again, that means $5 million a year. If we break it down like relatively equally across provinces and territories, thankfully, this was not calculated by me, it was calculated by Faye Johnstone at the Wisdom to Action. But essentially what it turns out to be is about $384,000 a year per province and territory. Keep in mind that the Enchanté network has over 120 members in all provinces and territories. So $384,000 a year per province and territory barely funds an organization. A lot of our community organizations are centers, right? Like pride centers. How are you supposed to keep on paying rent and keep, again, paying staff, paying insurance? It's impossible with this kind of funding. It was also especially disappointing because the Liberal platform that they ran with back in 2019 had promised us an investment of $10 million a year over 3 years. So this is a halving of what was promised to us. And then in terms of like women and gender equality and the GBV sector in particular, Anjum, I have noticed gaps in queer and trans inclusion. I can see that there is a movement of wage to go towards that, but I think there are some growing pains of moving from status of women to women and gender equality. And what does it mean to have meaningful inclusion of Two-Spirit and LGBTQ+ folks within the gender-based violence sector? Transphobia and queerphobia and homophobia are symptoms of gender-based violence. You cannot separate transphobia and homophobia from gender-based violence. And so you cannot separate queer and trans people from gender-based violence. So I'm gonna leave that at that.
Thank you, Emmett. And I think this is a really important point to take home, and also around how we can work with and collaboratively across different movements and across the feminist movement to really ensure full inclusion. So thank you, Emmett. And I'm sure we're going to get into more unpacking in the audience Q&A as well. But thank you so much. Next, I'll turn it over to Sharif. Another group that has been disproportionately impacted during this crisis has been young people, especially young people facing multiple barriers to employment and participation in society. There's been so many challenges, from finding a job in this economic climate, the impact on mental health. Young people were often the first laid off in the pandemic as well. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what the future looks like. And when we think about young people's needs and how they can reach their full potential, I know that this is a big focus of your organization. From your perspective, did this budget deliver for young people?
Well, it's interesting now just listening to Diana and Emmett, I had the same range of emotions when reading the budget. There were moments of things where I'm like, this is so amazing. And then there were moments of puzzlement of like, if we're going to go all in, why don't we go all out? You know what I mean? To support a number of different communities. So I want to share that, at the Students' Commission of Canada, that we're an intergenerational partnership, and that the responses that I'm going to be sharing today are actually grounded in the voices of the young people that I work with on a day-to-day basis. In fact, I am getting text messages right now from the young people from our organization who are telling me to say certain things in terms of this response to this answer, and I'll try to share as many of them as I can within the time that I have. So we're going to use an exercise to describe our reflections on the federal budget that we use to do a lot of our reflections. And it comes from my own personal experience, but also in our research experience. I'm a Y baby myself, and I grew up in YMCA camping, and we had an activity called Rose, Bud, and Thorn. So Rose is a highlight. Thorn is something that, didn't really land well for us or was negative. And Bud is what we're hoping to see, because I saw a question in the Q&A from Maya that asked, what do we need to do next? And I think, Jessica, or you described like that the budget was the end, but now it's the beginning of the next stage of the process. And so, for us, the buds are going to be really important in terms of how we actually see this through. So I'll start with some roses. First of all, we're heartened to see that the government continues to work towards grounding decision-making in the perspectives of youth, okay? After analyzing the nitty-gritty, it's clear that the youth perspective is not as much of an afterthought as in years past. I'm not saying that we're there yet, though. That's what I want to be very clear yet. If you read between the lines, there is an implicit link between the 6 key pillars of the youth policy launched in 2019 and some of the recommendations that young people made through that process and some of these ambitious investments, including, what looks like on paper, very ambitious investments to seemingly address the climate crisis. And today's Earth Day, as we know, and I think our government is going to be making a new commitment to reducing our climate change, our emissions. There's obviously some clear investments to support young people recover from the employment crisis and from student debt. An investment in the youth employment and skills strategy in Canada Summer Jobs, which, in our organization, we're a big fan of, because then we get to hire young people and actually walk our talk. And then it looks like, again, on paper, a large investment to continue the work on truth and reconciliation. But I want to share one of the texts that I just received a minute before I was meant to speak, that gets into some of the thorns here. There's been lots of investment in doing a youth policy, lots of investment in the State of Youth report, but there seems to be a lack of an explicit, cohesive youth strategy towards the budget. When I started doing the analysis, and I looked at the government web page on how this benefits young Canadians, it looked like, a piece of this program for young Canadians and a piece of this program for young Canadians and a piece of this program, rather than a kind of, a structured kind of strategy around really addressing some of the things that you brought up in your question. So, let's get into some of the thorns. There is so much more work that needs to be done to support youth serving agencies, like some of the folks who are on this. Emmett talks about the core funding. Number of youth serving agencies have been carrying the back of supporting young people outside of their school, whatever school is now, school spaces. And there doesn't seem to be a focus on what role they can play in terms of supporting young people through all of those various challenges that they're going through in this pandemic. I personally identify as mixed race, Muslim, and LGBTQ2S+, sometimes known as a walking intersection. So I don't see my communities, Emmett just really hammered that point in here. I don't see my communities explicitly reflected, in other communities that are furthest away from opportunity. A macro approach doesn't work at a time of raging inequality. And, it was great to see 300 million for Black-led organizations, but frankly, that's not enough. If we're really going to take a stand here and be anti-racist, as our government keeps saying that they want to be. So I'd like to see some targeted investments in a strategy for those, micro populations. It seems like the government of Canada has been taking a macro approach here, but we really need to be taking an approach to those communities that tend to be forgotten when we only try a one-size-fits-all approach, if that makes sense. I'm also looking for substance over style. I'm really heartened about the national child care, as a Y baby, someone can, I'm really heartened about that. But I'm also, I've also heard it before, I've heard it many times. And I really want to see the rubber hit the road on that. We really want to see the rubber hit the road on that commitment. So for us, the key is implementation. I don't know about you folks who are on the panel, but I think you're all tired of hearing about jurisdictional issues. you know, an 1867 document basically determining like life or death right now in our pandemic. And, you know, I really want to see our leaders come together and break down some of those jurisdictional barriers that have prevented us from achieving some of the changes that we want to see. And Diana, I think you reflected on that in your comments about making sure that the provinces are partners in the process, and that it's not a, you know, not what the provinces want, but that there's some national cohesion in what we want to do. So let's get into the buds, you know, the things that we're looking forward to and what we think, you know, where we would like to kind of see things grow out of this very historic budget. And, you know, I don't, you know, I want to kind of, you know, we chose rosebud and thorn for a reason, because the rose bush is pretty, but it's got the prickles. So, you know, you want to kind of make sure you get the full gamut of your analysis of what's going on here. But we want to make sure that there's a broadening of focus of budget investments beyond just formal education and employment. We know that youth, especially those youth who are furthest away from opportunity, can gain valuable skills and experiences in other contexts, and that youth serving agencies in particular, like some of the folks on this call right now, can play a critical role in supporting them to achieving their goals and dreams. We have, you know, at Students Commission, and working with some of you on, who are here today, we have done a lot of work to try to bridge, you know, the Zoom school experience, so that young people can continue to kind of get through this in a way that ensures that they're successful and that they thrive. We're also eager to see the Government of Canada's State of Youth report, you know, a key commitment of the youth policy. We had the privilege of working to support that process. We're hopeful that this document will ensure more explicit policymaking and budget decisions that are grounded, not in piecemeal things, this is for youth, but that are grounded in ensuring that young people are thought of as not as afterthoughts, but as a central piece of the budget and policymaking decision. Where's the national strategy to address white supremacy? That's another that's another kind of comment that's come out here. You know, as a Muslim person who happens to have a birthday on September 11th, which was very, very, very challenging for me as a younger person, you know, I'm really looking to see the same investment that went into addressing, you know, so-called anti-Muslim terrorism, you know, to go addressing some of our biggest domestic terrorist threat, if that makes sense. Another thing that young people have asked us to really put forward here today with you is we really need to stop suing Indigenous children who are seeking compensation for the underserving of their communities. And for all of this, a key policy recommendation that young people have, not as explicitly tied to the budget, is to lower the voting age to 16, so that youth who pay taxes, drive cars, help raise their families, can have a more explicit say in decision making. Thank you. That's all I'm going to say at this stage, but thank you so much for the opportunity to answer that question.
And you know, the final comment you just said was the perfect note to end on, because that is the question before us, right? Is there going to be an election, right? And if young people are continuously not allowed to fully participate, do their concerns get registered? So thank you so much, Sharif, and I'm sure we'll unpack that a bit more in the Q&A. I want to now turn to Jessica. And, you know, many of the things our panelists have raised so far, they need to be spearheaded and championed by nonprofits and charities. We have already heard a lot about the need to move away from project-based funding to core funding, to really substantially invest in the organizations that make recovery even possible. So, you know, I think about, you know, charities and nonprofits, and many of the organizations represented here. During this pandemic, we have stepped up in remarkable ways to create and support communities with essential services. But that was also on their backs, on the financial hardships that they experience. So Jessica, my question to you is, for nonprofits and charities, what did this budget do, and was it enough?
Thanks, Anjum. I really appreciate this question. And you're exactly right. Charities and nonprofits across the country, as you said, have stepped up, they've stepped in, they've put a hand out, any possible way that they can support communities, particularly the most vulnerable. They've been there through pre-pandemic and throughout the pandemic, and are critical to the recovery of our communities following COVID-19. Our charities and nonprofits, as we've heard through the panelists before me, are providing those high quality childcare spaces and day camp programs. They're youth serving organizations connecting young people to opportunity, particularly those farthest from those opportunities. They're addressing gender-based violence. They're providing housing. And they're doing so throughout the pandemic under extremely difficult circumstances, with seeing significant revenue reductions and lost income at a time of rising costs to deliver these services in COVID. And what we're also starting to see is a loss of these services and closures in communities, which will hinder our ability to continue the fight against COVID-19 and the recovery following. And for those who have joined today, YMCA, together with our other community service charities and nonprofits, including United Way, Big Brothers Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Club of Canada, National Association of Friendship Centers, and YWCA Canada, have been calling for the establishment of a fund to support our community and human service sector with operational bridge funding to help us get through the pandemic and continue to provide the vital services that we are providing, and also to give us supports to build resiliency through transformation, such as things like technology adoption as we continue to live in this virtual world, and other elements of transformation. So with this in mind, I was very excited to see the creation of a new $400 million community service recovery fund in Monday's budget to help charities and nonprofits adapt and modernize. The budget, though, was light on details with regards to the fund and what would be captured under modernization. But I will say that this was a welcomed investment, and I remain hopeful that there will be both the critical operational support that we've heard here today to, again, bridge the financial gap that charities and nonprofits have been struggling with, as well as modernization, because both elements are key to preserving services and supporting economic growth, supporting the recovery, creating jobs for women and youth and newcomers, and continuing to provide and scale up those critical programs that will help Canada get to or build back better. Otherwise, and this is a phrase that was coined by YMCA Canada CEO Peter Dinsdale, is what we'll be trying to do is putting an extension on our house while our house continues to be on fire, and that just doesn't make it feasible to bridge to modernization. In addition to the Community Services Recovery Fund, we did see proposes to renew the Investment Readiness Program, and also planned disbursements of the Social Finance Fund. And as Sharif mentioned, there was the creation of a $200 million Black-led philanthropic endowment fund and a new $100 million investment in supporting Black communities initiative. But overall, I think these investments reflect the government's recognition of the role of the sector in the continued fight and the economic social recovery. But as we've heard, it's not enough. And I think it continues to what it does present is an opportunity to continue to grow the sector and continue to build on these investments, and opens the door for ongoing conversations between our sector and the government in new and exciting ways.
So Jessica, as a follow-up, I think this is, the first budget I've read where there's been such an explicit focus on nonprofits and charities. Of course, more needs to be done, but why do you think that happened? Like, what allowed that recognition to happen from your perspective?
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think as been thinking about this a lot over the last many months and few days is our sector is big. There's 85,000 registered charities and over 170,000 charities and nonprofits, but we haven't always been loud. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has posed a real threat to our social safety net and our economic and social recovery if we're unable to maintain and support the organizations that are providing these vital services in communities. And so what, in my view, what I saw is our sector getting louder and saying that what's at stake here if we're not supported, and taking a multi-pronged approach to GR and public relations to really create a megaphone to deliver the messages to government and the public, and to really raise awareness of the needs of our sector and the role we play going forward. But I also saw, and I think what contributed to seeing a dedicated section in the budget to support and grow the sector was collaborative efforts to raise awareness of the problems and to identify proposed solutions for the sector and subsectors. I think this also contributed to the success rather than taking an individual approach to advocacy.
I think that's such a important note about getting loud, working together, and actually showing what's at stake. Such an important piece, Jessica. I think what I'll do now, we have over 171 people in the audience. There's a lot of questions in the Q&A. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually introduce my colleague Sarah Hannaford to help us figure out what questions we should ask from the audience. So Sarah's actually doing her placement at YWCA Canada. She's completing her master's in community engagement and leadership at Wilfrid Laurier University. So Sarah, I know the Q&A has been buzzing. What are people asking?
Hi, thank you so much for that introduction. Yes, there are tons of questions coming in. So the first question, and Sharif touched a little bit on it, but I'll pose it to everyone. And it's from Maya, and she's asking, any thoughts on concrete actions and organizing steps you would recommend to us, the audience, to hold the government accountable around the budget? So I'll pose that to anyone who'd like to take it.
Don't jump in on all at once. any thoughts on accountability?
I can start. I think accountability is going to be super important, and as we've heard earlier on, especially considering an election is imminently, we want to make sure to take the time to celebrate some of the pieces in there, and also to acknowledge the gaps, and to, as Sharif mentioned, take the finish line and immediately turn it into a starting line, and going back to government to identify the mechanisms for putting in place quickly some of the key investments, and working to raise awareness of the gaps and trying to find opportunities to fill those gaps. And I open it up to my other panelists to jump in also.
Yeah, I think we were just all respecting one another, trying not to jump on each other's toes here. I'll jump in though, just because I know we have a lot of questions and not a lot of time. We were really privileged to kind of I'm sharing a link in the chat. I hope it goes to everybody, or maybe to Apathy is Boring, which is a great organization, did some groundbreaking work on how systems change can happen in a society like ours, and they identified two key pieces. One is the need for the activist space, so the protesting, the activist space that's somewhat outside of the system, but also the need for us to use the system itself to change the system, and to have those working as closely as possible. I know it can be very challenging if you're agitating against a system to work with it. So I'm not saying that this is easy, but they found that the social changes that ended up happening were where there was a good combination and partnership and relationship between both. So what does that mean? It means it means participating in the voting process, which is why one of the key things young people have told us is lower the voting age so we can have a say. It also means going to those consultations, sending emails. Being in the province of Ontario, a key reason why there was a huge flip-flop was the combination of activists, rightfully kind of, putting their voices out there, but also the premier's phone line and email system almost crashed because all the people were sending emails and phoning about their concern about that was the formal mechanism to register your kind of voice. So I think sometimes that, people feel like engaging in the formal systems feel like they might be co-opted, and that's certainly a concern to think through. But this report really kind of highlighted the need to the agitation happen both external to the system and also internal to the system. So, you know, I know that folks on this call have been agitating behind the scenes and also on the streets probably, you know, to have those changes heard. And that's why why we did see so much groundbreaking stuff. The final point I'll just make is it is not the responsibility of the communities that are oppressed to do the agitating. So, you know, we need allies, we need accomplices, as a term that's been shared with me. We need folks who are not part of these oppressed communities to be doing the agitating, so that the policy lands in an intersectional way.
And just to add a little bit to what Sharif said, I think another great way that folks can concretely hold accountable the government is perhaps in a bit of an indirect way by supporting community organizations. If you have the means to do so, donate to your favorite like nonprofit or charity or organization doing frontline work that is not incorporated. Because if I think of the 2S and LGBTQ+ sector, for example, a lot of our like life-saving community frontline organizations have chosen not to be incorporated for whatever reason it may be. Sometimes it's because, again, the government is a colonial system and they don't want to participate in that, or maybe they just don't have the resources to go through an incorporation process and pay the fees. So regardless of the incorporation status of a community organization, if you have the means to support them financially, please do so. The less dependent that we are on government funding, the more efficient that we can be at the work that we do, because we don't have to wear as much white gloves when then having relationships with the government. Oftentimes, the reason why we have to be very cautious in our interactions with the federal governments is because they're the ones who hold the purse bag. If you're not able to give financially, if you have the capacity to give some of your time through volunteering, that is also an excellent way to support community organizations that are providing life-saving supports to community members. Make sure to find an organization that does something that you're really passionate about, or for a community that you're really passionate about. So that's what I would add to that.
Great. What a wonderful call to action. And I think that's what this pandemic has shown us, is that every single person has a role to play and has influence in the different aspects of your life. So thanks for that incredible call to action, Emmett. Deanna, did you want to share a bit on this question before we go to the next? No?
I mean, really just iterating what everyone else has already said, that advocacy works, right? And that's why it's so important for us to organize, to movement build, and to be good allies to each other within the sector, right? And I think, you know, we really see the success around childcare because of that relentless movement building, allyship, and so on. And to really sort of get us to the finish line, you know, we have this big investment now, but the hard part really starts now in terms of system building. And so, and as we said before, the provinces have to be on board, right? So again, it will require organizing in every province, building movements in every province. If you do feel passionate about getting childcare in your communities, please do join the movement by visiting timeforchildcare.ca and sign up there. Over the next little while, we'll be doing lots of different activities around that. And yeah, but all that's to say, advocacy works and we got to keep going.
Incredible. And I'm loving all these calls to action and directly putting it in the chat. This is exactly what we need. So I hope everyone who's on this webinar, you are taking notes, you're learning from these incredible champions, and you're also getting some homework as well. So I think what I want to do is one final rapid question, because we are somehow almost at the end of this incredible hour with all of you. So what I want to do, and Sarah, I'm gonna kind of take a question from the audience and kind of merge it. So, you know, we talked a lot about what was great about this budget. We also talked about what was missing. And we also kind of know what we have to do. So I guess my question here is, what is one thing that was tucked away in the budget that no one talked about, or was a glaring omission that you want folks at home to know and go read? It's a 724-page document. It's hard to get through all of that, but I think if people can point them in the right direction, that'll get people excited to learn more. I'm going to go, Deanna, I know we just ended with you, but I'm going to come back to you. Actually, no, first, I'll go to Sharif. Sharif, what is something you want people to go and dig in a bit deeper in the budget when you first took a look at it?
That's a big question, like finding a needle in a haystack.
That's what I do. I ask the tough questions.
In terms of a big big thing here. I think Canadians would be well served from knowing a little bit more about the youth employment and skills strategy, and what that actually means. It is a big ticket item, so it's probably something people saw in the headlines. I mean, the main headlines were childcare, environment, and COVID, right? But it is something that did pop out to me. But I think, just to the point that I was making earlier about the need to kind of, and Emmett's made this point as well, around the need to support the organizations that are actually doing the work. We really think about the employment experience at the Students' Commission of Canada as like not a job, but as a program that's helping to build future citizens, right? So I think there's a need to kind of, when we talked about that that need for a cohesive youth strategy, we need to think about not just filling jobs, but also about the job experience being a key part of the development of a young person's potential. And I think there's a need to kind of explore that a bit further and have Canadians more aware of what that strategy is intending to do.
Okay, gotcha. Youth policy, dig into that deeper. Next, I'm going to go to Emmett. Very quick thing.
Yeah, I'll be quick. So me, it's specifically about the money going to the gender-based violence plus sector. Specifically look into, make sure you hold, to bring back the accountability question, make sure you hold the government accountable, and especially Wage, who has the GBV sector under their wing, to include Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus communities inherently within the gender-based violence sector, which is simply not the case right now. Wage recently released a feminist response fund, which was quasi-inaccessible to members of our community because it required having provided programming specifically for women, which most of our member organizations do not do, because we serve a whole variety of gender diverse and sexually diverse folks. So hold the government accountable, hold Wage accountable to inherently including Two-Spirit and LGBTQ plus two folks when it comes to gender-based violence.
Excellent. Thank you, Emmett. Jessica, over to you. What's one thing people should dig into?
Yeah, thanks, Anjum. I think for me, the budget did include considerable investments in supporting Indigenous communities. However, for what I saw it was relatively silent on specific investments for urban Indigenous people. And I know our colleagues at the National Association of Friendship Centers have been doing incredible work throughout the pandemic. So I would encourage people on this call to go and learn more about the commitments in there for Indigenous people, and hope that there will be some accountability that these investments will also be accessible for urban Indigenous populations.
Excellent point. Excellent point. And we will make sure we send out that information to folks afterwards. And Deanna, one final thing that people should dig into deeper.
Yeah, one thing that's also so central to a feminist recovery is access to social protection, right? If women are sort of in that cycle where they go from one bad job to another because they can't take time to actually build their skills or look for better jobs, it's detrimental to them. And so there was a $3.8 billion commitment in the budget to modernize the employment insurance program and to make it more accessible. So I think that is something we really need to keep an eye out on how that is going to roll out, and the kind of consultations that are done around it. I'm sure we've all heard, the stories of women, you know, getting to their 7th month of pregnancy and then getting fired and not having access to maternity leave and employment insurance and things like that, right? So it's really important that, again, by modernizing the system, really looking at the different intersections that play out in people's lives. Yeah. And then if I can just mention one more thing, it is still fairly new that Canada is mandated to include gender-based plus analysis in the budget, right? And so there is actually an annex within the budget that sort of outlines the analysis, the GBA plus analysis that they have done for the budget. And I think it gives us a good insight into the capacity of the government to do this kind of analysis. So having a look in there and sort of, again, identifying their blind spots and their gaps is really important, particularly when it comes to sort of more marginalized communities.
That's great. And yeah, it's a hefty part of the budget, but so important. So definitely everyone definitely read through all of that. With that, I want to wrap up the panel discussion and thank all of our incredible panelists. It was such a rich discussion. I know I'm going to go back and listen to this recording again and take more notes. I took a couple, but I know I can take some more and really think about what was missing and how to keep our government accountable to really serve the communities who were hardest hit in this pandemic. Sarah, thank you so much for the Q&A and also helping to put together this entire event. I know we talked a lot about what was good in the budget, where there were gaps. One notable gap was young people. And actually, that's the focus of an upcoming project that we're doing with the YMCA. So Jessica, do you want to share a bit more?
Sure. So really excited to be continuing to work with YWCA Canada on how we prevent a lockdown generation and ensure Canada's young people have what they need to not only succeed, but to thrive. And this is something globally that the World YMCA, World YWCA, and several other global youth-focused organizations are thinking about and working on as part of their global mobilization initiative, funded by the World Health Organization and the United Nations Foundation. More information on the Global Youth Mobilization Initiative can be found in the chat. And to hear more about this work, you can also sign up using the second link in the chat.
Excellent. So with that, thank you everyone for the incredible contributions, the thoughtful questions, the interesting responses. I know this could not have happened without the incredible team at YMCA and YWCA. I also want to do a shout out to our awesome tech team, Kristen and Arissa, and also our interpreters, Claudine and Catherine. So with that, thank you, everyone. We'll be sending out information after the event, but really it's been such a pleasure. And I know this is going to be the first of many conversations to come. With that, bye for now, everyone.